Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast.
Hello.
Today, we're looking at a political upset that's really grabbed headlines in America's biggest city.
Oh.
Zohran Mamdani's unexpected win over former Governor Andrew Cuomo in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary.
Right. Quite a shocker for many. And The Economist jumped right in with its initial take, framing it pretty provocatively, didn't they?
They did. America's biggest city takes a strange turn. That was their headline.
Yeah. And so what we wanted to do today is kind of unpack that, look at The Economist's main arguments, what they focused on.
But then go a bit further, right?
Exactly. Use some more context, try to offer maybe a more nuanced view, what might have been missed or maybe underplayed.
And really get into what this victory actually means for New York and maybe even beyond. We want to get you thinking a bit deeper about it all.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, the news itself, because this was genuinely a big deal in urban politics.
Absolutely.
Zohran Mamdani, he's 33, a Democratic socialist, currently a legislator from Queens.
Mm-hmm.
And he managed to beat Andrew Cuomo, a political giant, a former governor.
Yeah, household name. Now, the ranked choice voting count, that's still technically ongoing.
Right, where they reallocate votes if no one hits 50% straight off. It's not final until mid-July.
But those first choice numbers are pretty telling, aren't they? Mamdani's leading Cuomo, 43.5% to 36.4%?
That's it. So the direction seems pretty clear at this point.
Definitely. And The Economist, well, they didn't waste time trying to make sense of it. They put forward a few key ways of looking at it.
And their main one was?
Their primary angle was this idea of a battle. The business-friendly center, that's Cuomo, losing its grip on the city's Democrats.
Okay, that's a familiar narrative, the center versus the left. And they pointed to Cuomo's backers as evidence.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look who was behind him. You had big names like Bill Clinton, Jim Clyburn.
The Democratic establishment heavyweights.
Exactly. And then the money. Huge donors. Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy, Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor, who dropped, $8.3 million into Cuomo's super PAC?
Wow, $8.3 million. That's serious establishment business-friendly backing right there.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then you compare that to Mamdani. It's such a stark contrast.
His platform is very different.
Completely. Tax the rich, talking about solidarity, pushing for things like free city buses, even city-run supermarkets.
And he's been a very vocal critic on foreign policy, too, specifically Israel's war in Gaza.
Right. And his support came from different places, too. The Working Families Party, big progressive figures like Bernie Sanders, AOC.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, yeah.
So purely on that ideological level, you can see why The Economist framed it as left versus center. It fits quite neatly, on the surface at least.
But The Economist didn't just stop at ideology, did they? They also looked at how the campaigns were run. What did they find interesting there?
They really highlighted Mamdani's campaign style, painted it as, super modern, really effective.
How so?
Well, digitally savvy, apparently great on TikTok, which is, increasingly important. And this huge volunteer base, a 36,000-strong volunteer army, they called it.
46,000 volunteers. For a primary, that's massive.
It's remarkable. And it looks even more remarkable when you put it next to Cuomo's approach.
Which The Economist described as?
As running like it was 1982. That's the quote. Basically, relying on name recognition. His father was governor, too.
Right, the Cuomo dynasty factor.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently he barely campaigned outside of these very controlled, orchestrated rallies.
While Mamdani was out pounding the pavement.
Yeah, they mentioned this notable 21-kilometer walk he did through Manhattan. It just paints a picture of two totally different playbooks. One grounded in grassroots energy, the other maybe more top-down, traditional.
And did The Economist suggest Cuomo was just complacent, even with all the scandals hanging over him?
They implied it, yeah. Which raises a good point. I mean, he had the sexual harassment allegations still unresolved, the nursing home deaths controversy from COVID.
Serious baggage.
Very serious. Yet, early polls had him leading. So The Economist sort of suggests he might have thought he could just, coast on the name and the establishment support.
Which looks like a major miscalculation in hindsight.
A profound one, yeah. Underestimating the voters' mood, perhaps their desire for change, or just their willingness to hold him accountable.
So, ideology, campaign style. What was the third angle The Economist took? Something about generations.
Right, the generational revolt idea. They suggested that maybe younger voters, millennials specifically, are just fed up with leaders who, as they put it, lost to Trump twice, but are still hanging on.
kind of a time for new blood argument. Did they have data for that?
They mentioned precincts-level data, yeah. Said it showed a correlation between areas with lots of millennials and support from Mamdani. It's a neat story. The younger generation pushing out the old guard.
Okay, and the final frame The Economist used was more of a warning, wasn't it, about the general election in November?
Yeah, general election peril. Basically, the concern that having a socialist nominee like Mamdani could actually cost the Democrats the mayor's office.
How?
Well, they floated the possibility of three-way race. If Cuomo decides to run as an independent character, he's got this ballot line called Fight and Deliver ready. And then you have a Republican candidate, too. That could split the vote in unpredictable ways.
And they quoted someone on this point.
They did, Jesse Arnn from the Manhattan Institute. He speculated that Donald Trump might actually like having, and this is the quote, a pro-intifada socialist, 33-year-old radical governing New York City as his foil.
Strong words. So The Economist's overall picture is this surprising, maybe even worrying, strange turn for the city.
That's the gist of their initial analysis.
Yeah.
But, maybe it's not quite that simple or quite that strange.
Okay, so let's dig into that. The Economist's take is interesting, but maybe we can add some layers. That idea of the center failing purely because of centrist ideology, does that capture everything?
I'm not sure it does. I mean, you mentioned the baggage Cuomo carried. It wasn't just his political positioning.
The scandals.
Exactly. The sexual harassment allegations, the nursing home stuff.
Yeah.
That wasn't about policy, was it? It was about character, judgment, accountability.
Did polls show that hurting him specifically?
They did. There's polling showing his net favorability among Democratic women was minus 22 points. And that was before you even got into discussing policy differences.
Minus 22. Wow. So maybe scandal fatigue was just as big or bigger than ideological fatigue with the center.
It seems highly plausible. Voters might have just decided they'd had enough of Cuomo himself, regardless of where he stood politically. The Economist maybe didn't weigh that personal factor heavily enough.
And what about the millennial revolt? Was it really just young people driving this?
Well, age was definitely part of it. You see shifts there. But looking at the early results, Mamdani's coalition seems, broader than just millennials.
Where else did he do well?
He won heavily in places like Astoria and Long Island City, in Queens, parts of northern Brooklyn. And importantly, reports suggest strong support in the Latino and South Asian majority precincts.
Okay, so that suggests it's not just age, but maybe class and race playing a big role too, a different kind of coalition.
Precisely. It points towards something more complex than just a generational handover. It looks more like a realignment based on shared economic pressures or community identities, perhaps.
Yeah.
Things that cut across age groups in those specific neighborhoods.
That makes sense. These are communities often on the front lines of affordability issues, maybe connecting more with Mamdani's message on that level.
Could be. It suggests a different dynamic than The Economist's focus on millennials alone captures.
Okay, let's talk policy. The Economist seemed a bit dismissive of things like free buses or city-run supermarkets, maybe framing them as gimmicks. Is that fair?
Well, gimmick might be too strong. These ideas aren't entirely unprecedented, take free buses.
Has that been tried elsewhere?
Yes. Boston did a pilot program on one of its routes, Route 28, and they saw ridership jump by 38%. Plus, buses spent less time waiting at stops. Dwell time dropped 20%. So there's some real-world data suggesting benefits, especially for lower-income riders.
Interesting. And the city-run supermarkets, that sounds a bit radical.
It sounds maybe Soviet-era at first glance, but the model Mamdani seems to be referencing is more like what Paris does with its food taste stores.
What's that?
It's basically publicly owned stores aimed at tackling food deserts areas without easy access to fresh, affordable groceries. It's about filling a market gap for social welfare reasons.
So less about state control of all food, more about targeted intervention.
Exactly. Now, there are valid criticisms, like those from places like Reason magazine, about whether government can run these efficiently or if it distorts the market. Those are fair questions.
Sure.
But dismissing them purely as gimmicks might overlook the actual problem they're trying to solve, like food access or transit equity.
What about the Gaza issue? The Economist highlighted his stance as a key part of his identity, maybe implying it was a big factor, possibly a negative one for some voters. Was it the defining issue?
It's definitely part of his profile and important to his base. But if you look at exit polling from the primary,
What did that show?
it showed that the #1 concern for voters, about 38% of them, was the cost of living.
Back to affordability.
Right. Foreign policy, including Gaza, was cited as the top issue by only about 9% of voters.
So a significant gap.
A huge gap. It suggests that while his position on Gaza is noted, for the majority of Democratic primary voters in NYC, the immediate economic pressures, rent, groceries, transit fares were far more decisive. The Economist's focus might have slightly overstated its electoral impact compared to bread-and-butter issues.
Okay, so if The Economist maybe underweighted certain things, what bigger forces do you think were really driving this result? You mentioned cost of living.
That feels absolutely central. It's not just a talking point. It's a genuine grinding reality for so many New Yorkers. Rent, subway fares, food costs, they've been rising faster than wages for years, especially since around 2019.
So it's a structural issue, not just a temporary blip.
Exactly. It creates this deep well of economic anxiety and frustration. And that's powerful fuel for progressive candidates who promise bold solutions, especially when they're targeting working families, younger people trying to get established, anyone feeling squeezed.
It makes Mamdani's focus on things like free buses seem less like a gimmick and more like a direct response to that pressure.
Precisely. He's tapping into a very real grievance.
What else was potentially underplayed? You mentioned ranked choice voting earlier.
Yes, RCV. It's not just about who gets the most first-place votes. The whole system changes the game.
How so?
It rewards candidates who have broader appeal, who can be people's second or third choice, not just their first. It encourages coalition building.
And Mamdani benefited from that.
Seems like it. Early data analysis, looking at voter files, suggests Mamdani did very well as the second choice for people who initially voted for other candidates, like Brad Lander or Adrienne Adams.
While Cuomo maybe didn't have that same second choice appeal.
Apparently not to the same extent. He had strong first choice support from his base, but maybe less crossover appeal. RCV highlights that. Just looking at first choice percentages, like in a traditional primary, misses that crucial dynamic.
That's a really important nuance. And what about the practicality of his ideas? The Economist might imply some naivete, but you mentioned his state role.
Yeah, that's key. Many of his big ideas, the free buses, a millionaire's tax to pay for things, need approval from the state government in Albany.
And he's already there.
He's already a state assembly member. He knows how Albany works, or doesn't work, as the case may be. So it suggests he understands the institutional hurdles. It's not just pie-in-the-sky stuff. There's a potential legislative path he's likely already thinking about. It shows a level of strategic thinking.
Okay, and finally, those 46,000 volunteers. The Economist noted the number, but maybe not the context.
Right. It wasn't just a spontaneous surge. You have to see it as part of a longer trend.
What trend?
The rise of democratic socialist organizing in New York City over the last, say, decade. They've had successes in city council races in 2021, again in 2023. They've been building infrastructure, networks, volunteer capacity year after year.
So Mamdani's army didn't come out of nowhere.
Not at all. It's the result of sustained, strategic, grassroots work, ward-level organizing. It's an evolution of that movement, not just a random phenomenon for this one race. The Economist maybe presented it more as a novelty.
Okay, that adds a lot of context. So looking ahead now towards the general election in November, what are the key things you think we should be watching?
Well, number one is definitely Andrew Cuomo. Will he actually run on that independent fight and deliver line?
He has until late August to decide.
August 26, 2025 is the deadline, yeah. He's apparently got donors urging him on. If he runs, it really complicates things.
Oh, but by splitting the vote.
Potentially, yeah. He could pull votes from Mamdani, especially among older, more moderate Democrats, maybe in the outer boroughs. It raises the question of whether stopping Mamdani becomes the priority for those voters, even if it means electing a Republican, potentially.
Which brings us to the Republicans. What's their play here?
Well, Curtis Lewi is the likely nominee again. In a three-way race, he wouldn't need 50% to win, maybe just over 30%, depending on the split.
And how might they campaign against Mamdani?
You can already see the outlines. Nationalizing the race, focusing heavily on Mamdani's socialist identity, and especially his comments on Gaza. There are reports the RNC is already testing digital ads with slogans like Intifada Mayor in places like Staten Island.
So expect it to get quite heated and possibly draw national attention.
Very likely.
And technically, the primary isn't even certified yet because of RCV.
Right. The Board of Elections starts that tabulation process on July 1st. We should have a clearer picture based on how those second and third choices get redistributed by around July 8th.
And simulations suggest Mamdani holds up well.
Yeah, one BOE simulation showed him winning pretty comfortably, 59-41, after the third round of counting. It suggests he does have that broader base of support beyond his initial voters.
Then there's the policy side. His ideas will get a lot more scrutiny now, won't they?
Oh, for sure. The honeymoon period, if there ever was one, is over. The Transit Authority has to put a price tag on the free bus plan. The Independent Budget Office, the IBO, the city's nonpartisan fiscal watchdog, they're expected to release a cost estimate soon, probably mid-August.
And the early estimate is around
About $1.4 billion a year, just for the buses. So the debate will shift to feasibility, funding, trade-offs. That's when the practical politics really kick in.
And finally, can he keep his winning coalition together while also dealing with established power brokers like unions?
That's the classic challenge for any insurgent candidate who wins, isn't it? He needs to reassure organized labor groups like the Sanitation Workers Union, DC 37, which represents many city employees. He's meeting with DC 37 soon.
But some unions might be tougher.
The police union, the PBA, is already openly hostile. So he has this tightrope to walk. Keep his progressive DSA base energized, but also build working relationships with powerful unions that are traditionally more cautious about radical change.
A very delicate balancing act indeed.
It really is.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. The Economist wasn't wrong in spotting a major political shift, a revolt against the old guard in New York.
No, they definitely captured that sense of upheaval. Something significant clearly happened.
But maybe the strange turn framing missed some crucial context.
I think so. When you look closer, you see factors they perhaps underweighted, like the sheer pressure of the cost of living crisis driving voter anger and progressive energy.
And the mechanics of ranked choice voting playing a key role.
Absolutely. RCV rewards coalition building, and Mamdani seems to have played that game better, securing those vital second-choice votes.
Plus, Cuomo wasn't just any centrist. He had very specific personal baggage.
Right. The scandal fatigue was likely a major factor, separate from pure ideology.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just an abstract center failing, it was Andrew Cuomo failing, for a mix of reasons.
So rather than some inexplicable event, Mamdani's win looks more like
Why?
the result of longer-term trends.
Yeah, maybe the combination of things that have been building for a while, a decade of grassroots organizing by the left, combined with worsening economic pressures, plus a flawed opponent, all coming together within an electoral system, RCV, that favors broader coalitions.
It paints a picture of a realignment class, race, generation, all shifting within the city's politics.
It certainly feels that way. And that brings us to the final thought, really, for you, our listener, to mull over.
Which is,
What does this shift in New York actually signal? Is it just a unique Big Apple story? Or does it tell us something broader about the future of political power, about progressive movements in major cities all across the country? Are we seeing a potential blueprint here?
the fascinating question to ponder.